probably is a case of us as a wider industry looking at how others have done it and just figuring out the best way to work together in that sense.
We have a tendency to only focus on the technological advancements we make and create, and not what made them in the first place, a human or humans. The true potential of these advancements is realized when we can place people at the center of any innovative solution. After all, if it doesn't benefit someone in some way, what's the point? It's about time we had an episode that explores this topic. How the integration of cutting-edge tools like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and immersive tech can transform not just the way we work, but how we develop and empower the people within our industry, and in doing so, benefit the industry itself. It's a never-ending cycle of positivity, or at least it is if we can master this technique. So it's about time we chatted to someone who is mastering this. Shall we meet them? Rob Claridge is Laing O'Rourke's European Learning Solutions owner, overseeing the transformation of its learning and development strategy. Known for his entrepreneurial spirit and his passion for solving problems by combining the new and the old, his time in the financial sector was marked with several awards, including the 20th Banking Technology Awards Rising Tech Star. Back to the present day, Rob now oversees the L&D of several new innovative products and projects, including immersive learning, augmented and virtual reality, to name just a few. His work to date on the reimagining of the Working at Heights course saw the project honoured at the Building Construction Awards in late 2022 in the field of VR. Since then, Rob has held talks on the metaverse, VR, and AI to showcase the innovations that Laing O'Rourke is working with right now. Rob, welcome to the podcast. And is there anything I missed off that bio?
Thank you, Peter. I think that was a better introduction than I could have done myself, more than I deserve. But thank you for that.
Absolutely no way. All deserved. As we'll find out as I try and delve into your brain and get that expert knowledge onto audio. So let's dive straight into it. Staying ahead of technological advancements is crucial for maintaining a competitive edge and efficiency, even in an industry that is historically slow on the uptake of tech. Yet you've had success in implementing technology within the field of L&D, learning and development. According to Oxford Learning College, an estimated 20% of the workforce in the UK will be significantly underskilled for their jobs by 2030. It's like 6 years' time. With this in mind, can you share where you see the current role of tech in transforming the L&D sector within construction?
Gosh, there's lots of different aspects to this one.
For sure. We like to start off light.
Yeah, straight into it. I mean, I'll start off by saying that first of all, this is the beauty of sitting in the learning and development space, that you are at the very forefront of all of these new developments from a technological perspective, not just technological, but broader than that. I think, and this is something that Pedro, who heads up data science with Laing O'Rourke, and I spoke quite extensively about in one of our previous talks. It's important that we stay aware of all of these developments. So when you think of the typical surge cycle, the lifespan of a technology, kind of that initial people are becoming aware, and then all of a sudden it explodes, and people are finding great use cases, and then it tails off towards the end. Those are definitely happening over shorter and shorter timeframes. So it's kind of developed this mindset of, well, we need to jump on the bandwagon and we need to just find a place where we can use these developments. So a great example most recently of that, I think, is blockchain. It's kind of coming in at here's the solution. Now let's find some problems that we can go and solve with it. And it makes sense, as I say, because the surge cycles are getting smaller, and we do want to make sure that we aren't going to miss it, because we've seen lots and lots of companies who have missed the boat. I think Nokia and BlackBerry, and particularly in the tech space, there's lots and lots of examples of people and companies that have. But at the same time, it's just making sure that we really do understand the user perspective. We really do understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and that we take that into consideration before we do run ahead with any of these types of technologies. So I very much see AI and the extended reality space as kind of, probably AI is a bit further ahead in that surge cycle. It's definitely at that exponential growth stage, and there's definitely lots and lots of great places that we can use it. The metaverse is probably a little bit earlier, but it's just ensuring that we do understand what we're trying to solve before we start adopting it. So I say this because I was in a financial institution where all of a sudden we did decide that in 10 years' time, everyone would need to know all of the ins and outs of blockchain, for example. And and sorry to be so down on blockchain, but it's not quite had the transformational. It's not been quite as transformational as people had expected it to be, shall we say? And that's across the board, and particularly in that world where crypto and other technologies were also being considered. So there's definitely something about making sure that we know that this is the right travel, the right direction that we want to take before we start investing heavily in utilizing these technologies, but also teaching it as well.
So is that a level of experimentation when it comes to new technologies that you'd potentially utilize? Are you testing them as well as using current forms of tech in the L&D sector?
Yes, absolutely. Very much take the agile mindset, so the concept of doing things in small chunks. And as I say, there's more methodologies for design than I can shake a stick at, but that essentially they're all saying make sure that you do understand the user, you do understand the problem you're trying to solve. And when we do bring in or think about a technology, we'll already have an understanding of, well, here's some of the problems, some of the issues that we face, and let's experiment. Let's give it a go. So the extended reality, specifically virtual reality, was just one of those examples. We knew that our working at heights course was not the most engaging. I think those people that run the course will agree with me to say. They won't be unhappy with me saying that. I mean, we're talking 200 slides of a PowerPoint deck, and I don't think any of us really consume information that well via a PowerPoint deck with more than 5 slides. So, and of course, it's also this, and this is the really exciting thing, I suppose, about extended reality more generally. We're talking about people who probably learn better from the kinesthetic side of the VARC learning model. So when we're saying that and that there's all sorts of different thinking around this, but the general thought is that some of us learn better from the visual or the audio or reading or the kinesthetic. Personally, I think we all learn better from the kinesthetic, but those people out on the site are obviously very much in that space. So if we can give them a way of learning which takes advantage of that, then they're very likely to take on board that information more readily.
That's it's an interesting point that people learn very differently. So do you promote when it comes to learning, development, upskilling? Is it a case of having the same outcome but utilizing different methods to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it ties, I suppose, a little bit into the AI aspect. So
Mm,
maybe less from an extended reality viewpoint, but there is this great development in that we're making training, making learning more bespoke to the person. So we're actually in the process of developing a global skills framework, by which people can understand their relative strengths and weaknesses, and therefore be recommended appropriate content or other decent opportunities around
mm.
the organization. It might be mentoring opportunities, shadowing different jobs that they might not have otherwise considered. And I think when you've got that kind of data, this is where you can start to make use of AI to look at your base data and make recommendations off the back of it.
Okay, so you've hit on a couple of points there, which allows me to move on to a
Mm.
slightly different topic. So the construction industry is often seen as a traditional sector, as we've just been discussing, but the infusion of modern technology is reshaping what we can do, if only on a day by day, tech by tech, step by step basis. Shockingly, in 2020, almost 7 in every 10 business leaders believed that they had a skills gap amongst their staff. So there's clearly a long way to go in any kind of learning and development and upskilling, reducing that skills gap. Regardless of how fast or slow the uptake of tech might be, there's clearly a need to do something about it right now. So, do you have any advice for doing this? And what I mean by that is bridging the gap between where we are now, utilizing traditional methods, and moving into more modern L&D learning within construction.
Yes, again, there's definitely several aspects to this. I think
Mm,
the first of which is, and I think we're doing a decent job as an industry of bringing in the right people, both at entry level, off of university and apprentices, but also pulling in from other industries.
mm,
So there's that flow of new thinking into the organization. I think, at least speaking on behalf of Laing, we are very forward thinking, and that means that if we do take people from other industries like myself, although I did originally train as a civil engineer, believe it or not, it's a case of being open to some of the thinking that they're bringing in as well. So
mm.
it's coming from an internal aspect, an internal perspective. The other key thing is that I think it's less about catching up perhaps, and really leaning into the fact that we're one of the industries that is best placed to leverage a lot of these new developments. So again, to lean back on extended reality, that came into the finance world, and I'll have to put up my hand and say I was one of the skeptics, because it felt like that classic situation of, here's the solution, let's find a problem to
Mm,
solve it with. And in the world of finance, I'd be interested if anyone has seen anything otherwise. There just wasn't a worthwhile problem that extended reality was the answer to. Whereas in the world of construction, we sit very much at that intersection between the digital and the physical. So
mm.
there are lots and lots of really good, strong use cases. That means that I think we can lead the way in these fields, as opposed to kind of painting ourselves as the industry that's lagging behind.
Yeah, for sure. So that leads me nicely on to looking at some of these techniques a bit more in a bit more detail. So there's things like, and you've mentioned metaverse, VR, and artificial intelligence, which I know some of your colleagues are more immersed in that aspect of the data, but they're becoming almost integral to various industries. Well, definitely integral to various industries, and almost becoming integral within construction. I've personally seen firsthand some great use cases of this technology, and I'm really fortunate in some of the founders being or have appeared on the podcast, such as Simterra, Gamma AR, and Yardlink, just to name a few that are out there that have appeared on the podcast. Could you delve into a few of these tech elements, if you like, and how you've seen them being used successfully within construction?
Yes. I'll give an example for both the extended reality and metaverse space, as
Amazing.
well as the AI that is more recent, although not necessarily construction specific. The extended reality metaverse space, as I spoke about earlier, we're using it for the working at heights training, and there are some really strong benefits in that space. I've spoken to how people learn better from doing rather than just looking at. Although I do wonder whether some of them are even looking at the PowerPoint slides. There's the aspect that it's. I like to say that you've got superpowers effectively. You can do whatever you want within that space. So you can fly around, look at it from a different perspective. You can stop time, fast forward it, reverse it. There's just more you can do in the virtual reality space that you can't obviously in the real world.
Mm.
And the most important aspect of that for a course like working at heights is that it is a safe environment in which you can fail. And we can't say that about a lot of other training that we have in the construction industry. If we were to go out on site and train people and something went wrong, there is that real risk of serious injury and worse. Whereas obviously virtual reality, you're welcome to make those mistakes. You can have a tantrum and throw things off the building and throw yourself off. I, a slight tangent, but I do believe that having fun is an important aspect of learning. When
Absolutely, yeah.
you are able to make those mistakes and learn from them, which is important because we do ultimately learn better or more so from our mistakes than we necessarily do our successes. So really, really useful technology for people to learn within. And then you have got the metaverse aspect, of course, as well, which does mean that you can do so within the metaverse. People can connect from any of our project sites and enter this world and talk to one another as we go about it. So whilst we're not quite there yet, you can imagine that we've got our virtual representation of a particular building site, and people might be doing different training activities around the site. So you're effectively entering this whole virtual environment purely for the purpose of training. So that's the metaverse come extended reality aspect. Then one of the and a very similar theme is how we're starting to leverage AI, and that is essentially one of the great ways that we can make use of it is to create safe spaces in which people can experiment with their leadership skills, for example, or management skills, or things I guess we might more traditionally call soft skills. Not that I particularly like the term. So very much like the extended reality space and the metaverse, there might be some people that are less comfortable with, for example, asking for a pay rise, or maybe it's receiving a request for a pay rise. Wouldn't it be
Mhm.
fantastic if they could practice in a safe space and be fed back on by an AI that has been trained to do so? And that's been really, really cool. And I think it's one of those rare situations where people are more happy to experiment and be honest with the AI than they would with a real person, just because it's embarrassing, right? We don't necessarily want to try a different leadership style and have someone think that we're um, barking up the wrong tree.
Mhm.
So that's been a really interesting space. We've not taken it quite so far yet, but a really interesting um, space that I think AI has definitely got a good use case.
For sure. Um, there's something I wanted to chat to you about, and we were talking about it briefly before we press record. It's something I hadn't even considered. Um, so just more focusing on the L&D aspect, but I suppose from a wider perspective as well, if you want to. Um, as we know, safety is a paramount concern within construction, where the risks are high and the environment is constantly changing, which you alluded to, the fact that having this immersive experience allows you to almost experiment with what could go wrong in a safe environment. Traditional safety training methods are evolving with the advent of immersive learning. Um, with one large contractor reporting that working at heights, virtual reality training decreased incidents by over 40% in just 12 months. Why do you feel, or why do you think that this training, particularly within construction, isn't as prevalent on more open source platforms like LinkedIn Learning and the likes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when it comes specifically to extended reality, that umbrella term for virtual reality, augmented,
Hmm.
and mixed reality, as far as platforms like LinkedIn Learning and Udemy and others of that ilk, it's just not everyone has access to that hardware.
Hmm.
So we're still, as I say, at the start of this surge cycle, the start of this journey where we don't all have headsets. So from that perspective, there'll be less there. But it's also as you say, we discussed earlier, the fact that we are a low margin industry, and some of the skills that we require within construction are not going to be so prevalent across other industries. So these big learning providers, creators, they're less likely to offer learning on those particular subjects, or the subjects that mean most to us. And that makes sense. We're not going to be their biggest customer. And as I say, a lot of the skills aren't super transferable across other industries. So it does mean that we have to fill that gap a little bit more. So another thing to add to that is that um, some of our learning is going to be more region specific as well. So even within Langerock, some of the learning that we self-create to fill those gaps in Australia is going to be different from what we've got
Hmm.
here, and a lot of the legislative changes that have happened since. So it's another great use case of AI, actually, because whilst traditionally it might have been quite tricky to create engaging learning yourself, we're actually moving into a space where we can utilize AI and utilize these new platforms to create more engaging learning, and really move us away from the baggage associated with e-learning, which isn't a word that I particularly like to use either, with all the baggage that it carries. But we can create some really good stuff quite readily now. So to give a few examples, uh, with recently utilized narration, AI generated narration, or perhaps an AI generated avatar to take people through subjects. It might be even as simple as talking to a generative AI bot as to, well, here's my training. What would be an appropriate script? And then you building it out from there, or refining copy, or there's even tools out there to give the dreaded PowerPoint and actually have that convert into learning. And then there's the other side of it in terms of putting it into a format which is more engaging. It's not just your classic. I think traditional learning is very much like a PowerPoint. To be fair, it's kind of you just click a few buttons and go to the next slide, and click a few buttons and go to the next slide. We are starting to make it more interactive, more like how you would consume content on the wider web. So there's a real wealth of technology and advancements in that space, which are relatively intuitive to use as well. It's not like you need to be a coder or a hacker to leverage this technology. You can actually largely do it yourself. So exciting.
Yeah, completely. And where we'll be in 3 to 4 years' time, who knows? And what tech we'll be using. Who knows? One thing that I'd quite like to ask is, you work for a large organization, and with that, although we do live in a low margin industry, or work in a low margin industry, you work for a large organization which probably has more capacity than the smaller organizations within construction, to trial, to test, to develop this type of technology and this type of learning. Do you feel that the larger organizations within construction, they almost have a duty to all the smaller players to test and develop and help them gain that knowledge and understanding on how this tech can help the smaller organizations?
Personally, I feel strongly that that should be the case, that we should all collaborate and better our advancements within the construction industry as a whole. It just feels like the right thing to do, especially when we're talking about things like health and safety, which would benefit a lot of people. And then there's the whole aspect of, well, if we work together, we're more likely to generate good things, good content, good advancements. Um, that said, I suppose it's, and you see it in other industries as well, it's not always the bigger players that actually are leading the charge, because as is always the case, I suppose the bigger you get, sometimes the more processes or the more red tape that gets in the way to
Yeah.
try and do ideas. So in actual fact, it might be a little bit of the reverse. It's the smaller organizations that are a little bit more agile, a little bit more willing to take that risk and actually develop these solutions. And it probably is a case of us as a wider industry looking at how others have done it and just figuring out the best way to work together in that sense. So in finance, for example, a lot of the fintech startups work quite closely with the bigger players in that space. And whilst they come with the new ideas, the excitement, the passion, and the skills, because a lot of these skills, they're very fresh, won't necessarily be within the bigger players. The bigger players bring back the finance and the data and a little bit of the know-how, and they can work together to develop some good solutions. Not to say that there haven't been cases where one side or the other hasn't taken advantage of that. Very, very much aware of that, but there's definitely something there in terms of, as a wider industry, what we could potentially do.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of develop on that point and move on to the final topic that I just want to discuss with you. And as we know that any kind of innovative solution and developing it and making it stick requires more than just the tech. It demands an entrepreneurial mindset, embracing risk, encouraging experimentation, as we've spoken about previously, producing or providing creativity for a couple of things that are required. But as we've just been talking about, that can be difficult for smaller organizations with limited resources, although they have a bit more freedom than the larger ones that can be tied up with bureaucracy and slow approval processes. From your perspective, is there, I know we spoke about collaboration, but is there a sweet spot to drive entrepreneurial innovation forward, do you think?
Yes, it's a really interesting one. A while ago, I talked a bit about entrepreneurial activities within large organizations, for example. And I guess to drive it, sometimes it's a case of, well, making sure, as I keep repeating over and over, but making sure that we do understand the users, we do understand the problem, but not just giving a open or a blank piece of paper to people that might be creative, because it's like the focus gets dissipated across
Mm,
a very blank piece of paper. It's all about making sure that we do provide some barriers for those people to work up against. And if those barriers need to be moved a little bit, then sure. But actually, I think a lot of creativity can happen within the confines of a frame, and then just iterate from there. I think that it's kind of a bit contradictory, but sometimes giving people complete free rein doesn't necessarily lead to the innovation that you might expect. I think I heard very similarly, completely different industry, but the way one of the movies that Pixar made, Turning Red, they had a very similar concept. So they specifically had someone who put up these barriers, whether it be from
mm,
a cost perspective or a timeline perspective, or things to that effect. And the creatives kind of operated within that and pushed up against it. And that's kind of what led to the success of that particular movie. I do stress though that these are positive constraints. It's not
yeah.
like the negative, lots of red tape. You need to pass through 10 different forums to even be considered for. Um, so that there's definitely that aspect. And I think, speaking from my own experience of setting up um, an innovation team within my previous organization, I think sometimes if people are willing to turn a bit of a blind eye initially to something that might not have gone through all of the processes, it can lead to great innovations. And probably a lot of people won't like me saying that, but it is very much the ask for forgiveness rather than permission sometimes, and letting people know that as long as they're not doing anything dangerous or ridiculous, then it might be something that inspires a really good development. So I, for example, had developed tools which relied on crowdsourcing back when that seemed like a dangerous thing,
Hmm.
and a lot of people said, "Well, can't do that." We did it. It was a success. The data backed it up, so it was adopted more readily. And there's plenty of examples of that.
I don't think you can say you can't do that to somebody that's got an entrepreneurial mindset. It's the worst thing you can say to them, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think as long as you're comfortable with, and like I say, I think um my I've been very very blessed with the bosses that I've had who have let me have that a little bit of freedom in that regard to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's a way that we can do it more readily within organizations. I'm not sure I've really seen the perfect way of doing it yet. It might be a case of looking at other industries like Pixar, but maybe just giving a little bit of sway so that people can experiment and do interesting things.
I think that's a great way to end. People doing interesting things, which I'm all for, and I think the industry needs more of that, and I think we will get more of that as more people come from other industries with the different backgrounds. Rob, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating here you talk about how we can get that innovation into not just L&D but the construction industry in general. So I really appreciate your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Been a pleasure.